Now that's how you start an organ podcast, with the trumpet militaire high up in the central tower of Liverpool Cathedral on the largest pipe organ in the UK. Yes, this is the Organ Podcast from the Royal College of Organists with me, Mark O'Brien. I'll be talking to Ian Tracey, the organist of Liverpool Cathedral, about the history and design of this extraordinary instrument and getting an exclusive preview of the brand new Echo Division, which will be inaugurated later this month.
It's not just a megalomania thing. OK, we've now got 222 stops, we have 11,000 pipes. It's nothing to do with that at all. We have just managed to make the organ even more multi-dimensional, and we can have even more spatial effects from the organ as originally intended. And that's been my raison d'etre. We're now complete.
Also coming up, another big cathedral, St Paul's Cathedral in London, where I have a fascinating conversation with Jeremiah Stephenson, talking about his role as the cathedral's organ education lead, where he's not only introducing the organ to young children, but using it as a way to broaden their appreciation of music more generally.
The worst thing you can do is start with an apology. That's the worst thing. If you start an article, many people think classical music is elitist, or the organ world might be considered stuffy, but then what is someone going to take from that? Classical music elitist, organ world stuffy.
Well, this year marks the centenary of the consecration of Liverpool Cathedral, the fifth largest cathedral in the world. From the very beginning, it was decided that a building of this magnitude needed an organ to match. Built by Henry Willis III in 1926, it was very much modelled on the vision of the cathedral's first organist, Goss-Custard, who laid out plans for an organ of multiple divisions, situated in various parts of the cathedral, to fully speak into its vast space. Custard was organist there from 1917 to 1955, and there have only been two subsequent organists in this building's history who have faithfully continued Goss-Custard's vision. Noel Rawsthorne from 1955 to 1980, and most significantly, Ian Tracey, who has been organist at the cathedral since 1980. I met up with Ian in the organ loft at the main console and began by asking him, with the arrival of a new echo organ, how many divisions does this instrument now have?
Well, there are 9 manual divisions and a pedal organ altogether, played from 5 keyboards.
And the thing about this organ is it's so huge. It's all over this building. Where do you actually start to make sense of it all? Where do you get to know the core, the heart of this instrument?
Well, of course, this is probably the worst place in the cathedral to get to know. Basically, things are not as they seem from the choir console, because the organ is multi-directional. Some of it faces into the cathedral via the nave cases. Some of it goes across the chancel here. There are other bits of the organ in other parts of the cathedral. The organ is actually from the main console here, not quite as it seems. The great organ hits you in the back of the neck from across the south side. The solo organ is also similarly on the south side and quite immediate. The swell organ, however, is down on the north side and faces into the nave and actually speaks into the middle of the central space. So at the console, quite innocuous, really. That is about half again as big as that in the nave. Then there's the positive organ, which is right up above us here in the choir console. And the choir organ, which is a bit of an anachronism really, because it's about as far away from the choir as one could possibly put pipes. It's upstairs in the ceiling on this side. And then the fun begins. Because the central organ on the central gallery of the central space we use for hymn singing and supporting congregations. It's miles away from us here. bombard organ is partly in the south case of the chancel here, the 30-inch tubas. And the 10-rank chorus, which is 10 ranks of mixture. It starts at 16 foot, 8 foot, 5 1/3, 4, etc. All the pitches. And the tuba magna, which is actually round the corner in the south-facing nave case. Which is about twice as loud as it sounds at the console here. And then upstairs in the 179 feet in the Corona Gallery is the trumpet militaire. Which will waken any congregation up.
I mean, it's interesting, you've got the positive there. To me, that kind of sits out slightly. You've got something that perhaps isn't as homogenous with the rest of the choir organ, would that be right?
Yes, it was an invention of the 1950s, actually, a 1958 rebuild of the organ. There was a section of unenclosed dulcianas, 16, 8, 8, 8, 4, 2, and a mixture. Basically, Willis developed all the families to their fullest, and he wanted an entire family of dulcianas. Now, Goss-Custard used to say to Noel Rawsthorne, his student, if they were enclosed dulcianas, they'd be half useful. But as they're unenclosed dulcianas, they're basically not. And he said to him, my boy, when you do something to the organ, you're going to have to think very hard about that division. So Noel, following the trend of the day, was thinking Baroque. And so they made out of those pipes, those dulciana pipes, they made an 8-foot flute, a 4-foot principal, a Nazard, a 2-foot flute, a tierce, a Spitz flute, and a mixture. So basically we've got a Baroque division. But not as inappropriate as some cathedrals, because the pipes are actually the pipes that were there, and this division has been manufactured from the pipes that were there. So it's not sort of small-scale stuff from a foreign builder that have been just plonked into a romantic organ, which is so often the case in town halls and cathedrals. They are actually integral to this organ because they were the original Dulciana family.
But remarkable for 7 stops. They seem to hold their own with the 160-odd that are surrounding them.
Yes, because Noel's big frustration was in playing Baroque music. You used to have to couple many choruses in order to get a secondary chorus. So if you're playing something like the Dorian, it was impossible to find a secondary chorus, whereas now is perfectly possible.
But presumably you don't come here to play Baroque. I mean, you can do. But I mean, with an organ of this size, are you kind of, as the organist, thinking of large palettes of sound, like you'd use a palette knife to make an oil painting? Is it perhaps not so good if you're wanting to do delicate, like a watercolour with a fine brush?
We can still do delicate watercolours. I mean, I let you hear the undulating flutes before.
So this is the choir?
Yes. The swell strings. Clarinet on the solo. French horn. Strings. So we've plenty of delicate colours, and we can use the small brushes. We don't have to use the. But of course, people see an instrument like this as a great noise-making machine, and actually, it is a great delight, it's a great thrill to hear the big stuff in the building when the organ's going flat out at big ceremonial occasions and things. And obviously, the wind presses are huge in order to actually speak into this building. The building volumetrically is 300 cubic feet of air, and so the pressures that are involved in this organ are immense, because obviously the organ needs to make an impact in that space.
But I guess, even though people come here because it's so big, I wonder, is it not just because it's loud? In a sense, organs of this size, is it also about the density, it's the thickness of the sound. And I'm thinking of just the myriad of 8-foots you've got all over the place. So it's not necessarily about volume here.
No, it's not, no. We've lots and lots and lots of choice, and we've 5 diapasons, for example. There's number 5, number 4, number 3, number 2, and number 1. They all have completely different characters, but they all still add together. They each add something to the
That
chorus.
was just 5 diapasons. I mean, that was a huge...
It was indeed, yes. And then there's a double, which is almost as loud as the 5.
It is amazing.
And a 32-foot contraviolone on the manual.
I mean, that's extraordinary. I've never come across a 32-foot on the manual, on the grade. How does that work? I mean, surely that's too muddy, or if you're playing too many left-hand notes, you could sort of, break it.
You can play it up the octave. So that can be the 16-foot, an octave higher. Then the chorus will be so much more bright. And
Do you ever
brittle.
use the 32-foot on the grade?
I often use this as a solo.
So this is the 32-foot right at the top of the keyboard. But how easy is this organ to play? Because although you're going around all of these lovely colours, you were playing something earlier on the swell, which is on the north side facing west. You were then doing something on the clarinet on the solo, which is on the south side facing direct to us. Goodness knows what the pedals are. With the limitations of the speed of sound and the size of this building, can you play in time? I mean, it must be very difficult.
It is, and that's part of the learned experience. I first played this aged 11 on the 4th of September 1966. I couldn't have my organ.
Now, hang on a
lesson.
minute. You remember the very day
I do
that
indeed,
you played
yes.
this organ? Explain
And the
that.
time.
No, come on, how?
Well, I was supposed to be having my organ lesson in the Lady Chapel, as we all did. And the Lady Chapel blower had given out. And Noel said in a rather reluctant way, "Oh, we're going to have our lesson in the cathedral today." And I thought all my Christmases had come at once. And that was the first time I sat at this immense console. And I absolutely adored it. And I've been sitting here ever since. So it's now about 57, 58 years of getting to know this instrument. And also getting to know it from up here, because now we have the Hudson recital console downstairs. And it's possible for a visiting recitalist to get a total impression of what the organ is doing in the building from downstairs. But when we sit on the ashtray, as we call it, up here, halfway up the wall, or 40 foot above contradiction, as my predecessor used to say, we sit here, we're slightly out from the gallery, but we still can't appreciate everything the organ's doing in the building. So a lot of it's stored experience and learned experience, because one has to know what it's doing downstairs. And it's just a lifetime of knowing it and knowing exactly what balance is and what's slightly delayed downstairs, and therefore to play ahead on this keyboard. And if you want absolute coordination, And sitting up here playing, I prefer to play up here. It's just like putting on an old pair of slippers, really.
But when you're accompanying the choir, then presumably you're removed from them as well.
Yes.
I mean, at what point do you have to switch your ears off? And I don't know how because you're anticipating their beat, acoustically they're behind you, then you've got a bit of organ that's around the other side of the building.
Yeah.
That is a skill in its own right,
It is,
possibly
it
unique
is.
to hear.
And that's the difficult skill. The nearest pipe to a chorister is probably getting on for about 80 feet above their heads. And therefore, when I'm looking at that monitor, I'm anticipating the choir master's beat. I'm playing ahead of the beat so that the organ stands a chance of being in sync downstairs, and that the choristers obviously are singing on his beat and singing on, coordinating with the organ. And that is the difficult thing. And also knowing which bits of the organ to use, which bits are helpful to them, which bits are unhelpful to them. The balance, because if the congregation is sitting in the presbytery, the balance of the organ is quite different to the congregation sitting in the nave, and so one has to use the organ in a different way dependent on where the congregation is sat. For evensong in a chancel, one would use different things. Downstairs, one would be very cautious over using the swell organ because it gets to the congregation first, it focuses in the central space, and they would hear more organ than choir. So we really do have to change the way we play dependent on where the congregation is sat.
Well, to help you with that, you do have is it called the central section? You've got an organ halfway down here. How does that sound?
Well, the central organ we use for hymn singing. That holds the congregation together.
I mean, that's quite far away. I mean, I was watching, you probably hear you
Yes.
striking the keys before we hear the sound. I mean,
Yes.
is that the furthest sort of pipework you've got away from the organ? Because-
Well, God's trumpet is probably a bit further. We have a trumpet militaire on 50 inches of wind up in the Corona Gallery at 179 feet, and that's even further.
I notice you're really striking the keys. That
Yes,
looks impossible because you can tell that you're willing it to sound quicker. I mean, that's about a
Absolutely.
half a second delay.
It is, yes.
People who know this organ, tuba magna or trumpet militaire, which is best?
Well, the tuba magna's just had a facelift. The tuba magna's been a problem stop right from its inception.
Oh, no, really?
Yes, because it used to be at the top of the south case, and the plinth is still there. And the first Dean Dwelly, hated the thing, and it filled the chancel with sound, and his stall is just beneath it, and he had it moved because he couldn't stand the racket, and it was on 50 inches of wind at that stage. He had it moved and baffled and put behind a pillar in the nave-facing case, but it was still pretty loud, I think. And there were always problems with its speech, so subsequent rebuilds took the pressure down. I think it ended up about 42 inches or something. And then the organ was extensively cleaned and overhauled in the 70s, and I think they took it down to 36. And it was never quite the stop again that it had been. And Noel, at that stage, had never heard the tuba magna in its original position. So he had it moved back up to the plinth in the chancel. But of course, it filled the chancel with sound. The choir would immediately stop singing because there was no point in singing if somebody was using the magna. And that's not the point of the magna. So I had it moved back into the south case. And the organ has been being rebuilt since 2007. We've had a project that's gone on and on and on because we basically had to raise the money. When Justin Welby was Dean of Liverpool, I went to him and said, Mr. Dean, the organ's giving its age away and all sorts of problems are happening and we do need to spend money on it. And he said, you raise the money, you can have a rebuild. If you can't raise the money, we haven't got any spare money. So we raised 1.14 million.
Gosh.
And over 17 years, we've had the organ rebuilt, cleaned and overhauled by David Wells of Liverpool. But we sent the tuba magna back to its original builders at Henry Willis because they had all the original kit and the spares. And it's now been returned to its 50 inches of wind.
Grief. And when was this done? So how new was this tuba magna?
It's only been back about 2 years.
Gosh,
Yeah.
right.
So it is absolutely phenomenal. It's around in the south case, so your microphone will pick up about half its volume, I think.
Wow.
Yes, it's pretty phenomenal. And if you're downstairs in the nave, that really is like the second coming.
It is, that's firing right down, isn't it?
It is, yes. I mean, the trumpet militaire is different, you know. It's a different timbre. That's a real tuba, rounded, you know, a good English tuba sound, only writ large, whereas that's a continental sort of trumpet, you know.
But extraordinary because of the distance of that trumpet up in
Absolutely.
the tower. I
Yes,
mean,
yes,
it's all sort of ethereal
Yes,
as well as dynamic.
We should have always had a Corona organ, but Adolf Hitler had other ideas. So the Corona organ and the central organ were casualties of the war. And so...
Oh, so it had been made and then it just
Yes.
got bombed before it was installed
Yes,
originally?
that's right, because the Willis works in London were bombed.
Right.
So the Corona organ, we've reinstated the Corona division, but there should have been more stops than just the one. And the central organ, similarly, we've reinstated the division, and most recently then, we've been able to reinstate the idea of the echo organ.
Yes, well, that's why we're here. So the echo organ, that is right at the east end. It's above the altar, right in the triforium. What's it for? What are you going to do with it? How often are you going to use it? How does it work?
Well, basically, it's the furthest echo of the organ with ethereal stops. It has several uses. I mean, A, to be an echo. B, Goss's point was to have sections of the organ in different parts of the cathedral because the building is 1/8 of a mile long. So we're talking huge difference distances here. Therefore, you know, to have a a vast quantity of organ in the east end here, on two sides, is not to help the choir when they're in different positions in the cathedral. Now, we've solved the central position there, and obviously we can deal with the choir when they're around this area. We've never had a part of the organ in the sanctuary area, and the choir frequently sing from the sanctuary and around the altar in processional services, and we've therefore only ever been able to do unaccompanied music there. So one of Goss's ideas was that there would be an organ up there in the choir triforium, and they could in fact sing with some organ in the sanctuary area and the presbytery area, because obviously anything that you play on in the chancel will get to the congregation first, and it will be probably louder than the choir. So it's a dual purpose, basically.
But really liturgical function. This isn't sort of repertoire
yes,
stuff.
It is. It's and to be ethereal and distant, to improvise on and to play at holy moments in the service. In fact, the central organ was from pipes from St James's Waterfoot in Lancashire, which was a redundant church seating about 1,000 people. Pipes made by Henry Willis III's men, probably the same men that made our great organ pipes. And this organ was going begging in a church which was being vandalised. So David Wells rescued it, and we were able to use the great organ for the central division, and now we've been able to use the swell organ for the echo division, and it's been hoisted up. Your last podcast from here was all about that, and it's now
a nice touch with David Wells, of course, because extraordinarily he knew Henry Willis III as a young boy. He served as an apprenticeship there.
He did indeed.
I mean, there is a real connection here.
He's had an unbroken association with this organ even longer than my own. He's the only other person with a longer association, and he knows every nook and cranny of it. He's incredible encyclopedic knowledge of the organ, and he's been looking after it in his own right since 1980. I think he came up here for the first time when he was 15 to hold keys for the tuner, and then started tuning it in his own right. So the echo organ, it really completes it's the last division to complete the names, of the divisions that Goss envisaged. And it starts with 2 strings, which are very small scale.
Now, first of all, where do you play it? Because you've got 5 keyboards here.
Yes.
And
you can play
9 divisions on the manuals. Kind of, do you need a 6th keyboard, really?
Well, it's possible. All these divisions float.
Right.
So this will float on either the bombard division or the solo division. That's with the box closed. I'll just open the box for you.
I can barely hear that.
I'll close it again.
So it's a very faint whisper right at the end. I mean, that's...
It just becomes, as somebody once said of the altar organ at Westminster Abbey, a memory of a sound when you actually close the box. Here's the flute. A rather nice diapason. 4 foot. 2 foot. Mixture. And then there is an 8-foot oboe. A 16-foot oboe. And a rather nice little trompet. So a full swell. I'll close the box on it.
But that's a really extraordinary sound because it lives up to its name. I mean, we're standing where we are, halfway up in the organ loft. It does sound like it's next door.
Yes, we're halfway
it's
to
very
it.
faint, isn't it? I mean,
And
the box was open when you were doing all of that.
Indeed.
Yeah.
It's 3 bays away from us here. But think about the congregation. The recital audience are at least as far again, and they're also half again as low as we are. So we're at about 40, 50 feet here. And the pipes are actually 120 feet up there.
It's so deceptive, isn't it?
It is, yes. The whole building is deceptive. It's just so massive. One loses all sense of scale and proportion here.
But how does that fit in with the organ? How are you going to use that? Is it just going to be a little accompaniment bit if the choir are up there? Can it work to accompany the rest of the organ? Can you just sort of give me an idea how it blends in with how you can use it musically with the other stuff?
It will just be used for echo effects. That's the whole idea of it. So I'll look at the strings with you.
Right.
Here are the solo strings. Here are the swell strings. And here are the echo strings. So
Barely hear it.
barely hear it, yes. And if we add the choir undulating flutes into that, they're sort of halfway between the swell strings and the echo strings. So we're going to have a lot of fun with it. I mean, we've only been allowed to play it in private. We've not been allowed to let anybody hear it during the daytime. So this is absolutely the first time the public are listening to the organ. It will be unveiled at the anniversary recital on the 19th of October this year.
Which you're giving?
Which I'm giving, yes. It's my 44th annual anniversary recital, although I've been to about 70-something of them, I think. And we'll dedicate it in evensong at 3 o'clock, and then it'll be heard for the first time in Vienne's Berceuse from the 24 pieces, because I'm playing the Vienne Berceuse solely on the echo organ, so even the solos so that the whole of that will be played on that, and then I'm playing the Cochereau Hommage, which uses the Vienne Berceuse, but it's a homage to Louis Vienne.
So this is part of the cathedral centenary. The cathedral is 100 years old. The organ is 98 years old.
It is indeed, yes.
This is... Now, don't want to dwell on age here, but Ian, when you started here, you were the youngest ever, I think, cathedral organist in Britain. You're now...
one of the others.
Well, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to frame it as you're now the longest-serving organist at this cathedral.
Yes.
Nearly half, the existence it's been going in.
Yes.
Seeing the organ getting to this state near its completion, it must mean an awful lot to you.
It does indeed, yes. I mean, it's been my life, the cathedral, and I have tried to do my best for the organ. I don't think the organ, in my entire knowledge of it, has been in a better sounding and playing state, and I'm thrilled to bits of that. That's 50% me and 50% David Wells, because David Wells and I have worked on it together. It's been our lifelong ambition to sort the organ out. We're both not getting on. We're a bit long in the tooth now. A pair of old dinosaurs. We've often joked
it's not
about.
showing. It's the water in Liverpool. Whatever it is doing the trick.
And so we just feel that this is a lifetime's achievement, because we've now put the organ back into absolutely spanking condition and playing condition, and very, very proud of that. In fact, we put Noel in the wall just a couple of anniversary recitals ago.
Noel Rawson?
Yes.
Oh, his ashes are interred in...
They are. Alongside Goss-Custard. Goss-Custard was put in the wall in 1964 underneath the organ. Gosh. I was here for that, for the dedication of the memorial, and Goss's ashes being put in. And obviously I played for Noel's ashes being put in. And the architect, because all this has to go through Royal Fine Arts and Cathedrals Heritage and. So when the architect was planning Noel's memorial, he did a computer-generated thing of the 3 memorials. You can't read the writing on mine, but...
So it's there. There's room, is there?
There's room alongside. So the 3 of us, because we've spanned... Gossi did 38 years, Noel did 25, and I've done 44 to date.
44 years.
So we'll all be together again. And of course, Gossi taught Noel and Noel taught me, and Noel followed Gossi and I followed Noel.
Is this organ now complete then? Because certainly in the time I've been coming here, you added the central division, you added the corona, you've now got the echo. I think there were plans originally, 98 years ago, for more. Are you hoping for that, or do you think you're done?
Well, certainly as far as I'm concerned, I'm done. I've written my last fundraising begging letter, definitely. But it may be my successor, whoever that is and whenever that is, has designs on it. We have a wonderful painting of what the case would look like on the nave bridge. The nave bridge was only manufactured so it would house the west organ.
So there was plans, so right at the end of the cathedral, the west end, there was room for another division.
A big double-sided case, rather like the chancel cases. And Giles Gilbert Scott designed the case, and the song room, we have an artist's impression of the case. The stops were actually on the 1940 console downstairs, on the big console which you can find in Sumner's The Organ, with it just like a daisy field of stops. And there were so many stops they had to put the couplers across the music desk because there wasn't room for the stops. But there was a 3-manual and pedal organ planned, and you'd be able to play it from a console on the screen and also from the 1940 console. But I think David Wells said to me he thought the case would be about 2 million. And then, a solid English oak case that matches all these cases, and we wouldn't be allowed to do anything less than that. And then what went in them would be a further 2 or 3 million, I think. So you'd be looking at 5 million, I think.
Right, so not anytime soon.
Not anytime soon, but you never know. My successor may have a thirst for it.
But where we are now, you're sort of in heaven with what you've done.
I'm absolutely in heaven, and I'm so thrilled that we've got the echo organ, because it's not just a megalomania thing. OK, we've now got 222 stops, we have 11,000 pipes. It's nothing to do with that at all. We have just managed to realise Goss's tonal palette. We've actually managed to now make the organ even more multi-dimensional, and we can have even more spatial effects from the organ as originally intended. And that's been my raison d'etre. I wanted to see his ideas taken forward, and that we're now complete because we have what Goss really wanted us. And I think the West End organ was probably always pie in the sky, but they built the bridge. And the only purpose of the bridge is for the organ to go on it.
Oh, right, I know that.
But I don't know whether we'll ever. But you never say never.
Well, watch this space. In the meantime, Ian Tracey, thank you ever so much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Well, aside from holding down a busy recital career and being the Associate Director of Music at All Saints Margaret Street in London, Jeremiah Stephenson is making waves with the innovative work he does at St Paul's Cathedral as the organ education lead, devising events and workshops designed to introduce children to the organ. I met Jeremiah up in the organ loft at St Paul's and asked him where the idea of having an organ education lead came from.
I inherited 1 day a week of what was a full-time job done by a predecessor, Tom Daggett. And I think Tom is really the trailblazer of this type of work because he conceived this idea, hey, what if we go into schools, get them doing singing and get them playing the organ? And we get digital instruments into schools, we give them organ lessons. At the same time, in his role for the cathedral, he was doing some broad brush kind of work with 30 kids at a time in workshops rather than individual organ lessons.
And where are these kids coming from? Are they aspiring musicians? Have they been selected by their schools because they show an aptitude for music? Or are you getting people who wouldn't know one end of a cathedral, let alone a pipe organ, from another?
It's definitely the latter category. So the work that is done in the capacity of organ education lead at St Paul's, it's about building partnerships with certain Church of England schools within the Diocese of London. And my colleague Will Bruce, who's inherited the larger part, that's the choral side of things, he's going in there 4 days a week doing all sorts of singing activities with these kids, and he's structuring that so that he's going to the same schools again and again and building up an actual repertoire and an appreciation of choral music and group singing with these kids, rather than turning up one day, here's a load of stuff that you're going to forget, see you next year, bye. He's in there every week. The work I do is much more sporadic in that it's based around an event that happens every term here that we call the Organ Day. And I get 90 primary school children.
90? I mean,
90, 90.
90. You get 90 kids all
Yes.
looking at you and you've got to introduce them to the organ.
I will go and visit the schools with a digital organs. So there's a pre-existing relationship with Abinger organs, and we get an Allen digital organ of the type that is used in the Barbican for the orchestral concerts, things like that. So they're well stocked, but they are a digital organ. And we take those
these
into
are in the
schools.
school. Oh, you take them with you.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
travel with
yeah,
an organ.
Have organ will travel.
Good grief, right?
Yeah,
okay.
so we take that in
Yeah.
the main school hall. I play for them in the assembly and get them to listen to a few of the sounds. And then we do break out and we do workshops for years 4, 5, 6, 7.
What's the age group for that?
Right, so the youngest are 7 and the oldest are 11. I think 7 to 11.
And what's the first thing? So there you are. You've travelled with. We're walking with a digital organ on your back. You go and set it up in the hall. What's the first thing you play to them? Are you playing organ music, or is it tunes that you think they might be familiar with?
Right, this is absolutely cutting to the heart of the difficulty, because I don't know anything about these children. And it's easy to kind of try to guess and think, what would children be interested in? But ultimately you don't know. You have to make a guess, and you have to have multiple things in the hope that some things will interest some of the children. You have 45 minutes in which to do that, but you only have one chance to make a first impression. And this is a thing that I personally have been mulling over, and I've tried lots of different things. And I was doing one of these days with my colleague Will Bruce, who I mentioned, and I started off by inviting questions from the children saying, does anyone already know what this is?
What, the music?
Well, the organ.
Oh,
Does
right.
anyone actually know what this is? Right, you have to start basic. Know what the level is. There are some kids who get shown a photo of St Paul's Cathedral and they think it's a mosque.
Well, this is the point, because, of course, we're talking central London,
Right.
a very diverse mix.
Right.
We shouldn't assume that there is any Christian familiarity or
Indeed.
culture.
I think the safest thing is to invite questions and say, does anyone know what this is? What are you noticing? How many keyboards does it have? 3. Look down. 4. All of that stuff. And my colleague Will said to me, what if you just play? What if you just play? For example, if you just start playing that, wow, and the kids can see, because it's a digital organ or the downstairs console here, they
Now,
can see what's going on.
Some people, there's a great effort in introducing young people to music, to arts. The last thing they would think about would be playing some Dupré.
Right.
Because they would think, you need to know all about the French bit, or it's modern romantic, or we need to start with Bach, or...
Yep.
You're saying, no, go in
Just
with a bang.
go in, just go in. The worst thing you can do is start with an apology. That's the worst thing. If you start an article, many people think classical music is elitist, or the organ world might be considered stuffy, but then what is someone going to take from that? Classical music elitist, organ world stuffy.
So what's their reaction then when they hear a Dupré prelude?
They are just in awe at the sound, at the fact that someone can physically make that happen. Because remember, music for these kids is mostly going to be coming out of a speaker. So there's actually the idea of live performance and what that means to get across here. And then you blow their minds further by saying that there are kids their age who are engaging in world-class live musical performance in this building every day, multiple times a day. But there has to be an encounter that comes to them first. I think that's the most important thing here. And you can play Dupré to them and invite them to respond in their own words how it made them feel. What did you notice? What did you feel when you were listening to this?
And what is that? I mean, are you surprised then? Because it might be challenging or surprising to you to get that sort of uninitiated response to your playing. What are the surprising things that actually you've learned by listening to their reactions?
Loads of stuff. This is why I love this work. And there was something actually that was quite surprising. It's, again, not to make assumptions. Because there I was practicing the Svelink Ballo de Gran Duce variations. I was going... And I was in my own little world, and the Year 5 class came in, expecting their workshop 50 minutes earlier than I was expecting them. Fine. And I was playing this, and they came and they all just sat down in silence and let me finish the first couple of variations. And I thought, you know what, this is on the music desk, let's talk about it. I said, give me some describing words about this piece. And they're saying it sounded grand, and it sounded solemn, and all of this. Or someone said it was joyful, and I was like, oh, solemn, joyful. Is there actually a space which has both of those things going on? Oh, ambiguity. Wow. Okay, art might take us to places that don't fit our preconceived categories. But, we went through, and the variations, and I said, okay, here's our big duke. Let's think of a character. What's he doing? In each of these variations, he's eating a hog roast, he's having a dance, and they made a story based around each of the variations. And then, these are year 5s, remember. They are 9 and 10-year-olds. And I said, does anyone notice the way in which I'm playing this? Does anyone actually notice how I'm playing this? And they did notice I was using early fingering.
No.
They said, oh, you're using the same fingers again and again.
Right, okay, gosh.
Right, because kids notice stuff. Kids recognise quality, they are impressed by a skillful performance, and they take a very low view on inauthenticity. Children immediately detect if an adult is trying to put on a thing that doesn't come naturally to them.
But it sounds like there are two things going on here, because it's not you introducing them to the organ, so you're going to go on about wind pressures and pipes and voicing and scaling and stops. You may do that.
Yeah, some kids love that.
But the sounds of it, you're teaching them how to listen and appreciate music. And so you're giving them, if I'm right in assuming this, the organ as the gateway for them to go in and appreciate music. This is not necessarily, is it about getting kids to play the organ? Is there something more?
I think you're absolutely right about the organ being, well, let's say a gateway drug to the arts in general. The organ serves as a wonderful, versatile, colourful, enthralling piece of heritage and culture that we've inherited. And with that, not just teaching about the organ, I'm teaching a set of values. And those values are an appreciation of both the skills that go into making and playing these instruments. I do take in some pipes that I made in the Flentrop workshop, made of wood and metal, and I get them to handle them and look at them. With primary school children, you've got to be aware that you mustn't stay on the same thing for more than 5 minutes. So I kind of have a variety of things that I juggle, and you'll notice that I'm just going from talking straight away to playing these musical examples from memory. But it does allow me to leap in between having a conversation about Minecraft and why the music of William Byrd actually slightly resembles it.
Now that's an odd mixture. Not many people would have started with that. How do you get into Minecraft when you're an organ lead at St Paul's talking about William Byrd?
Well, you notice that there's some chatter breaking out behind you. You turn around and you say, is there something you'd like to contribute to this discussion? And one of the kids goes, sir, it's like Minecraft. And rather than being dismissive of that, I say, well, yeah, actually it is.
So you're playing them some William Byrd at this point?
If you have something that's kind of like... If you're doing that kind of thing...
And that was Minecraft?
Well, I fooled you. That's...
Oh, no, it's William Byrd, wasn't it?
No, it's not. Actually, it's an improvisation on... It's a standard bass line that would have been improvised on. Byrd probably did things based on that. It's the standard bass lines that was used for improvisation in all sorts of Tudor music. And you know what? Minecraft does that as well. And a lot of these internet meme tunes, they are in 32-bit music, which is like your Game Boy is 2-part counterpoint.
But the kids are picking up on that period style of Tudor, early Renaissance Baroque music.
They recognise that video games wishing to evoke a certain historic-y kind of vibe are going to draw from real examples of music of a certain period, because it taps into, there is still a sort of cultural memory of medieval music sounds like this.
I would have thought then kids would be more interested in getting to the organ then, because they would then want to play Minecraft rather than Byrd. How are you then bringing them into, or are you not bringing them into the church? Is that the problem when suddenly then the functioning role of an organ as a liturgical instrument comes into play? Where do you go with that with these, year 5s?
That's where I think the idea of it being linked to St Paul's Cathedral is especially pertinent. Because when they do come to the cathedral, and when they also work with my colleague Will Bruce, we prepare them to sing some pieces, and they sing those under the dome, and they always sing a hymn. And we've been using the...
But would they know that? I mean, so you teach them the hymn whether they know it or not, and then they've got to sing it.
And they sing it, and we say, this is the kind of music we do here. And again, that's without some kind of apology. We embrace the fact that the music that we are taking to them is from a specific cultural and religious background, and it is tied to Christian worship in this particular style.
Where does the apology come from? Because what you're doing here is doing something with pride and confidence.
Right.
I know exactly what you mean. I'm sure we're all guilty of it when we're suddenly faced of trying to explain the instrument or the music, that there is an inherited preconception of either difficulty or remoteness.
Yes, I think there's two sides to this. I would guard against making assumption on behalf of groups of people and saying, oh, this isn't very inclusive, and then making up a story in order to feel ashamed of the tradition you have.
Maybe because you think it's too hard for them.
Yes, maybe because you think it's too hard.
So you're patronising and dumbing down.
Yes, indeed. So there's that thing. But at the same time, we need to be very careful that we do listen to people if they say that they do have an issue of feeling included or not included in a thing. And so it's about centering other people's experiences rather than going and imposing things on those people. The values that I would teach are of how to engage with the art rather than me going and saying, you have to think about it this way. So that's in already making it inclusive rather than dictatorial. The other thing in with that is in the listening back and paying attention to the hurdles that people have that you might not have anticipated for engaging with your art. In one school I was in, there was a very acoustically live main hall, and I noticed there was a kid who was really suffering when we were doing the singing, and there were actually a couple of kids who were sitting right at the edge of the hall with their hands over their ears, and they looked like they were having a terrible time. And I went to the teacher and I said, can you tell me more about these kids, and is there anything we should do differently for them? And they said, they are autistic and they have sensory issues, and they just do this when they need to, and we just let them. And I thought, that's a bit of a pity, isn't it? So the moment we're done with the singing, I said, okay, that's been a lot of noise and a lot of excitement. We're now going to explore some of the quieter sounds on the organ. And I played them a piece using just the flute stops. And I said, okay, here's an improvisation game that we can play using the flute stops of the organ. They're going to be very quiet, so I'm going to need you all to be quiet to listen. Already got them on side. You two over there, would you like to try the flute stops of the organ? Immediately, relief, yes. And I centred those children in the next activity, and they were included. But these are the kinds of things that, rather than trying to guess ahead, you have to be ready to respond to, and it might surprise you. Be ready to be surprised.
But you do complex stuff as well, because,
Right.
you're then going to, if you've opened with, Dupre first prelude, that's a good sort of show opener. But then are you going on to explain more things in counterpoint or organ music, the core repertoire of doing Bach or Buxtehude or that kind of thing? Where do you get the next level of engagement over and above the novelty of this quite high-functioning instrument?
I think that's a multifaceted thing in that you have to do that within the day. There has to be a variety.
It's a lot to do.
It's a lot to do. You have to do that in the day, but you've also got to think bigger picture. And what happens next to these children? What happens when you've left, packed up the organ, they've been to St Paul's Cathedral, what is there for them? And that was really a challenge for me in this role, was to think, how do we measure outcomes rather than outputs? It's all right producing a shiny brochure for your funders saying, we visited this many schools and this many children were shown an organ, to this many children now come to Evensong, come to concerts, engage with musical opportunities locally. So to that end, I'm trying to build things into the role here for the kids that we visit. So there's an organ recital that I'm trying to make a yearly thing where every school that we've invited over the year can then come and have reserved seating under the dome. The work that Will Bruce does gets them singing in the cathedral, and he's trying to build the side of that so there's more opportunities for them to sing concerts, other events, and we're just trying to find ways also to connect them with things that they might do locally, because these are quite often East London children, and we rely on the goodwill of music staff, and there are some local churches that have choirs and things like that. So we're kind of giving some thought to the strategy of that. What happens next to these children? Because just to cut back to what you're saying, what is this for? Are you wanting to encourage the next generation of players? I think it's much more important with this kind of work that's broad brush, that includes everyone. We're getting the next generation of audience members, of people who are going to come to concerts, of people who are going to be enthusiastic about the organ and its repertoire, and will feel that there is a space for them where they can engage with it how they want, and that they can contribute to, even if it's financially later on. Who knows if some of them will end up being hedge fund managers. But the people who are going to say, hey, we need to support this, it's the whole next generation of people. They have to carry the torch for this, especially the people who aren't themselves the performers, the people who are the, I don't want to say consumers, because it's not that kind of relationship. The people who recognise the value of art and want to see it not only continue but flourish. Because let's face it, there are more people and there is more money than there's ever been.
I mean, there's a lot going on there in terms of the possible outcome to all of this. But I guess what you're doing, which I think is really important and significant, that even if they're not going to be the organists of the next generation, you are normalising the pipe organ as that route to appreciate music and that platform on which these children are beginning to understand the bare bones of music. And I think that's really significant, that the organ is being used in that way, rather than here's this very special thing that we have in these buildings that other people play.
Absolutely. So the analogy that I like to draw here is a thing that's very common in the sporting world, which is the pyramid. They call it the pyramid of attainment. So there's this idea that you have the big base, which is everyone. Everyone can engage with sport. You can go down to the park and have a kick around with your mates. You can join a gym, whatever it is. And in the case of football, it's very clear that there's a progression that is designed to find and facilitate talent and the people who want to take it further. So there's your school clubs, there's your county clubs, there's national clubs, different age groups, training programs. And in the classical music world, I think we have a rather unhelpful conception of the difference between the different ends of that pyramid, in that we think there are these untouchable, talented, unique people who just are musical at the top. And then there's everyone else. And so I'd like to reframe that. Instead of being a pyramid of attainment, I'd like to think of it as being a pyramid of engagement. How much do people want to engage with this on their own terms? Everyone should be able to listen to and appreciate the craft, the skill, the repertoire. But beyond that, if they want to play for themselves, there will be people who want to go on and be organ scholar types. And I would love for anyone who wants that and wants to put the time and the energy into that to be able to do that without hurdles of things like race, gender, class. But at the same time, there will be people who don't want to pile that amount of energy and time into it because they have other things going on. They are at a lower engagement level. But here's the absolute crux of the matter. I believe that a high level of quality artistic experience should be possible at all levels of engagement. And at the lower level of engagement, that maybe means simpler pieces, fewer pieces learnt in a year, less pressure. Some people don't like playing under a ton of pressure. You know what? That's fine. There's different ways to enjoy performance. But you can modify that as a teacher in whatever way is necessary so people get that high quality, yes, I'm enjoying this is what I'm getting from it. So with the work at St. Paul's, this is the bottom level of that pyramid for everyone. And I'm giving thought to how to, it's kind of like a drinking straw, how to guide people up into those high levels if they want to. One of the ways in which I've already started doing that here is the introduction of a Organ Inspiration Day. It's like the Organ Day, but rather than 90 primary school children, it's maybe 10 to 15 secondary school children who already play the organ or the piano to a high level and want to learn the organ. And we had one last term. We had kids from the Queen Elizabeth School in Barnet come down. They actually have a really good, thriving music department with organ students, and they have a Viscount digital organ, and the RCO has been great at really providing those for schools that have a certain number of organ students. Fantastic. And they came here, all of them played a piece on the dome console, and they were absolutely wowed. They all played the OBE Chapel Drake organ, they played the Willis on Wheels, they played the box organ, they played the new Klopp practice organ, which is in a acoustically insulated room up at the triforium level.
You've been doing this role, for just over a year?
I think it's pretty much exactly a year. Yeah.
Is it too soon to see tangible success? I mean, have you noticed any success at this stage that convinces you you're on the right track?
So with this work specifically, I think the immediate success is in the feedback that we get from the students and the teachers for both the workshops in the schools and the actual organ days. People absolutely love it. The kids are beaming by the end of it. And Will Bruce manages to get them singing in 3-part canon effectively in a piece of Jonathan Dove. That's astonishing, given that these are kids with no prior background or experience in music.
It's remarkable, yeah.
Right, so the proof is in the pudding with that. In terms of longer term goals, I've got to think of ways to monitor things like, if we have an event for the kids, how many show up? And if they don't, what are the hurdles? Just the fact that we've reached so many children and they've all engaged with it, and I've learned something each time from what the kids have said and the teachers have talked about the positive effect that it's having. I think the lead that we get from the actual teachers is so valuable.
Well, Jeremiah, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you for doing this. At the end of the day, when they're all fluent in counterpoint, they can sing, 5-part motets. What do you leave them with as the last thing they hear on the organ?
This question reminds me of something that one of my students said in a video that we were producing for some funders, where I said, Mark, what do you love about playing the organ? He said, well, it's like a mega piano. And that's what the kids really take from this, and particularly the fact that it has an independent keyboard for the feet. So you always have to give them something that makes maximum use of that.
And on that note, that's all for now. Next time, I meet up with William McVicker at a very interesting organ from the late 1960s to ask him everything he knows about the organ reform movement. Was it as bad as we think? And I also meet Ben Blore, organist at the London Oratory, to talk about the opportunities and pitfalls of how organists can market themselves and promote their music through social media. So until then, from me, Mark O'Brien, goodbye.